Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff, and this is the weekend reading report. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to be posting going forward, but I thought at the very least I would do like a weekly reading report of some things that I'm just reading in the middle of it, instead of waiting to do full book reviews, which these days, by the time I finish certain books, it's been taking me a while. But I wanted to share that I'm currently working my way through two big books. Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, which this volume was very kindly sent to me by Michael K. Vaughan in one of his book giveaways. I've been meaning to read it, but he happened to send me this version, and then I found I think he sent me this one, unless he sent me a Hunchback, but I think it was this one. Anyway, this is the Norman Denny translation. And I had tried to read this before years ago, and I read the translation that was in, I think, that mass market big fat paperback with the little girl on the front cover, and then the modern library version. And it may have been the same translator, and I just found it very tough going each time. But Denny's fantastic. I mean, this is a really wonderful translation. So it's a wonderful book. He is a marvelous writer, and he's quickly rising up into the ranks of my favorite writers of all time. And he reminds me most of one of my favorite writers, Leo Tolstoy. He really is very Tolstoyan in a lot of ways, and equal to Tolstoy in some ways, and in other ways not so much. But he's marvelous. I wanted to read a couple of passages from this. As you can see, I've marked it quite copiously. Overall, I'm finding it enthralling. So he does this thing that Tolstoy does. He writes in this very kind of Victorian, authoritative voice of like, I'm the writer, I'll be taking you through this town. Look at this steeple, and look at that man walking down the street. Very much. It's so taboo nowadays to do that, right? But I'm really finding that I'm responding to this type of voice very much these days. I'm not sure why. But he does it as good as Tolstoy does. And his knowledge is as authoritative about history and politics and people as Tolstoy's is. Very deep, very knowing, very wonderfully, this is how it is for these kind of people in this situations. And you're like, you're right, Victor, it is. That's how it is. His flaws, however, make him a lesser writer than Tolstoy, I think, in that he's very melodramatic. And Tolstoy would never steep to some of the melodrama that Hugo does. I could see why, Tolstoy has never lent itself to a Broadway musical. Although, I think there was a musical called The Great Comet of 1812 that was built based somewhat off of him. Some parts of War and Peace, perhaps. I'm not exactly sure. But I could see why it would be not hard to do a Broadway musical from him, because this is a mammoth. This is 1,200 pages. I am on page 350. But already some of the heart-tearing parts of it are young Cosette and the trials and tribulations that she is suffering under the Thénardiers. Oh my God. But he's also a very moral writer. He's wonderfully, he wants to write about something. He's like, look, I want to talk about truth. I want to talk about justice. I want to talk about what it means to be a good person. And it's so refreshing to be, a pre-cynical era where people thought that, this mattered actually. And it's quite wonderful for me to feel like it still does actually. And I respond to it very much. But also it's shown me that, you kind of forget these days novels are written, they're movies, right? For the most part, probably 80% of novels it's just narrative, it's dialogue, it's description, it's, incident after incident, and it's really done in a fairly straightforward fashion, up, down, and it's over. But you forget that the novel itself it can contain so much. And one thing Hugo does, which is incredible, first of all, is the digressions, okay? So the first 60 pages of this book are about this bishop who lives in this small town. And who summarily dies not too long after the actual story starts, and you never see him again. But he's the bishop that whose house Jean Valjean comes to when the story actually gets started on page 70. So I'm reading 60 pages of this bishop, M. Murel, I think his name was. And it's enthralling because basically he's painting the picture of what is a good man? What does it mean to be a good man or a good person? And so he'll these little vignettes of this bishop in this town about how he handles money, how he handles people, how he handles politics. And I'm just like, oh, this is wonderful. Like it's ennobling to read. It's fascinating. It's enjoyable in all these ways. So I don't even mind that the story takes 60 pages to get going. And then the story starts, and then there's the next section of the novel. He does like a 50-page treatise on the Battle of Waterloo, and only the last the last 2 pages of it, a character that's going to enter the story later on shows up. The last 2 pages of a 50-page throwdown on like, this is what I think Waterloo means. This is what it meant to Napoleon. This is how it was fought. This is why it was lost. And you're just like, holy cow. And it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. That's very Tolstoyan to me. I feel like Tolstoy took a page when he talks about Napoleon in his book. It's very similar to Hugo in the sense of like he's trying to reckon with Napoleon's impact on history and what it meant. And Hugo and Tolstoy have slightly different takes on what Napoleon meant to Europe, but they're equally fascinating. But to get back to what I meant about the novel, is the novel can encompass, like, other than just narrative, it can encompass essay. In the case of Dracula or Frankenstein, it can encompass letters. If you read graphic novels like Watchmen, Watchmen is a great example of what I think the novel itself can do. You've got the narrative chapters, then you've got these treatises on the superpowers, then you've got an intersection of a comic that has thematic resonance to the rest of the book. And there's so much packed in. And in a weird way, to our kind of attention-addled, present, it's in a way more entertaining, where rather than just like chapter after chapter of plot, character, action, you've got these asides, and it just reminded me how exciting it can be to read a novel that can do a bunch of different things, because not a lot of people do that anymore. Novels are very straightforward. So I'm rediscovering that with him, which is wonderful. So yeah, I'm having a ball. I wanted to read 2 sections because of some of it is Dickensian. He's also Dickensian, and again, I think he was writing around the same time. I think Dickens was first. I think Dickens started maybe before him, if I could be wrong, but they're kind of contemporary. So some of the character work is so Dickens, and his character work is amazing. I will read you one piece. So I'm going to read you two quick paragraphs. One of them is about his thoughts on the guillotine. So, a lot of what happens in the beginning of the book, he's reflecting on the Terror and the French Revolution, which had taken place years earlier. And so he has this basic, this one paragraph on what the guillotine means. And it's magnificent and not dated in the slightest. So I'm going to read this briefly. Quote, "A scaffold, when it is erected and prepared, has indeed a profoundly disturbing effect. We may remain more or less open-minded on the subject of the death penalty, indisposed to commit ourselves so long as we have not seen a guillotine with our own eyes. But to do so is to be so shaken that we are obliged to take our stand for or against. Joseph de Maistre approved of the death penalty. César de Beccaria abominated it. The guillotine is the ultimate expression of law, and its name is vengeance. It is not neutral, nor does it allow us to remain neutral. He who sees it shudders in the most confounding dismay. All social questions achieve their finality around that blade. The scaffold is an image. It is not merely a framework, a machine, a lifeless mechanism of wood, iron, and rope. It is as though it were having its own dark purpose, as though the framework saw, the machine listened, the mechanism understood, as though that arrangement of wood and iron and rope expressed a will. In the hideous picture which its presence evokes, it seems to be most terribly a part of what it does. It is the executioner's accomplice. It consumes, devouring flesh and drinking blood. It is a kind of monster created by the judge and the craftsman, a specter seeming to live an awful life, born of the death it deals. End quote. Like, mic drop, Victor Hugo, man. It's amazing. I mean, it's just beautiful. And then the other part I wanted to read was his description of, so if you guys even know the musical or a little bit of the story, you know, Cosette is dropped off by Fantine because she can't afford to keep her, and she drops her off with these horrible, the Thénardiers, who keep this inn, and they treat her like terrible, like it's really, really treated very badly. So he writes extended character descriptions of both of them, and this is the wife, Madame Thénardier, so it's fascinating. Quote, the reader will perhaps have some recollection of Madame Thénardier as she was first described, tall, fair-haired, red-faced, fleshy, broad-shouldered, huge and active, resembling those monstrous women who parade themselves on fairgrounds with paving stones suspended from their hair. She did all the work of the house, beds, rooms, washing and cooking. She was the climate of the place, its fine and foul weather. She was the very devil. And her only assistant was Cosette, who was like a mouse in the service of an elephant. Everything trembled at the sound of her voice. Window panes, furniture, people. Her broad face was scattered with freckles like the holes in a cream skimmer, and she had a slight beard. In short, a market porter clad in women's clothes. She swore splendidly and boasted that she could crack a walnut with the blow of her fist. Had it not been for the romantic tales she read, which now and then caused the coy female to emerge surprisingly from the ogress, no one would ever have thought of her as a woman. She was like a drab grafted onto a fishwife. She talked like a gendarme, drank like a coachman, and treated Cosette like a gaoler. A single tooth protruded from her mouth when in repose. End quote. I mean, holy cow, that is very Dickensian to me. Wonderful. So I am thoroughly enjoying Hugo Les Misérables. And at the same time, oddly enough, don't ask me why, I'm rereading Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. I'm a fan of The Fountainhead. She's crazy, bona fidely crazy. I know about her personal life and what she was like. Her politics are kind of odious at this point. I think when I was younger, it was very exciting to think in these terms, right? Her politics now are very odious. But what is exciting to read is that she, like, every page of this novel is alive with her psychology and her philosophy. So there's very little fat in terms, she's always showing you aspects of what she thinks is the correct way to live, the capitalistic way, and, what is wrong and what is right. And odious or not, it is very entertaining and fascinating. So, all the confrontations between characters, between Peter Keating and Rourke, between Rourke and Ellsworth Toohey, they're electric because Ellsworth Toohey represents this smothering, there will be no individualism, right? Rourke represents the hero of the individual world. Peter Keating is sort of like this sycophant. He's all that's wrong with kind of, corporate climbers. And then there's Dominic Franklin, who I haven't gotten to yet, who's, very polarizing figure in feminist-wise, and for sure. But it's crackling. And I'm still fascinated with it. Like, in some ways, I kind of feel very guilty about it. Not because of her politics, because I'm kind of aware of that, but it's very pulpy at the same time. Like, I wound up enjoying a section that's about Rourke walking into a room and, like, being Howard Rourke and everyone else being like, oh my God, who is this man? And I want to kill him and I want to be him, right? And I think, man, that's so clumsy and so pulpy and so cheesy. Like, a lot of it is very cheesy. And yet I'm hanging on. I love it. Like, I love the cheese because within the cheese, she's got these, philosophical and psychological ideas that are filtered down. And the novel is told in these vignettes. Every little chunk of every chapter is sort of like, this is how Peter Keating is climbing up the ladder. He did this thing and then he did this thing. And all of these little short vignettes about what he does are alive with the philosophy that his character embodies. And Rourke is the same thing. Rourke goes to visit Henry Cameron. Cameron is the failed version of Rourke, like, but he's still like he's going down. And he's like, get out, Rourke. I won't let you destroy yourself like I've been destroyed. And I'm just like, God, this is awful. But I can't stop reading. Like I can't look away. So I'm loving it. Like I want to reread Atlas Shrugged after this because I feel like that was a lot more of a slog. It was a lot harder of a read. There was way more speechifying. And I know at the end, Rourke has the big speech. He gets caught blowing up that building development. And so he has a huge, like, 10-page courtroom speech, which is like, okay, Ayn, you've already told me this in your book. You don't have to kind of beat me over the head with it. But in the rest of the book, there's no speechifying. Like, it's characters inhabiting philosophies. And it's just so fascinates me. And I find it so entertaining and so intellectually stimulating of like, she's very smart. And she's very sharp in terms of like a sycophant like Keating. And then characters know they are who they are. Like Peter Keating kind of knows who he is. When he sees Rourke, he's like, he kind of knows he's a slouch, but he can't escape it. And he struggles with it. So I don't know. I really like it. This is like probably my third reread. But this is the first time when I'm wrestling with my good taste versus my enjoyment. Like I'm not averse to pulp, but I can read a Lee Child novel, until the cows come home. And I know what it is, and it's fun, and it's entertaining. But there's an intellectual heft to this that goes along with the bad choices, the bad dialogue and sometimes bad description. But there are sometimes the woman can write. Like, there are descriptions that are beautiful. Like, and her writing about architecture is incredible. So there's a first-rate, in a weird way, Hugo is kind of her favorite writer, which is kind of funny, because they're kind of similar in that, Hugo has this Achilles heel of melodrama, which, he can't escape for whatever reason. And she has this also, a very melodramatic Achilles heel of, like, very clumsily pitting people against each other. But like Hugo, I enjoy the contrast when these characters kind of come up against each other. So I'm enjoying the hell out of it. And it's another monster. What is this, like 700, 600 pages? So I'm reading two monsters at the same time. I'm crazy. But yeah, so that's this week's reading report. I guess I'm just gonna kind of do weekly reports on what I'm reading. It's gonna take me a couple of months to finish those books, and I'm in no hurry. I'm sipping Hugo, so I'll sip a couple of chapters and they will inspire me and enthrall me, and I'll put it down. And I think that's why I started Rand. I wanted something else to kind of hop to, and I didn't want to rush through Hugo. And I've totally quit the whole booktube rat race where it's like, I've got to read 100 books and I'm going to read 50 books. Like, if it takes me all year to read Hugo, it takes me all year. But the reading experience hopefully will be it's already been so rich that I can read, 2 chapters of Hugo and I'm up walking on air for like, the rest of the day. And I was like, that's the kind of reader I want to be. That's the kind of thing I want to do. I don't want to have finished Hugo so I can post a show. I finished Victor Hugo and I'm going to read 10 more books. It's like, that's crazy, So anyway, I'm very much enjoying these, and I'm enjoying being back in the saddle. So hope you find my humble attempts to talk about this stuff entertaining, and I'll see you next time.